Hello class. Tonight we're going to be working on the spatial sequence project. In this project you're going to be designing a series of spaces for an outdoor space that will be ideal spaces for 3 seasons. One season being spring, one being summer, one being fall. It's got a lot of similarities with the last project we did, the community gathering space. In this case though, we're going to be designing using models as our tool to develop our design. In the last project, we used drawings. As an architectural student, and eventually as an architect, you will use a combination of drawings, models, electronic models to develop your design. Each tool has a time that it is best and most effective. Each designer finds a different way that they like to use the tools and when they choose one over another. As beginning students, we're defining your experience and having you test each of these means of design. But as you develop, you'll be making these decisions yourself. Tonight, we're going to look at the kit of parts. This is your budget for the project. How to make these pieces and how you can use them and modify them. I'm going to show you some tools that you can use with that process. And then we're going to look at the concept, how to take a concept to a partee, and how to begin translating that partee into your design, and some of the options that you have within this assignment on how to work through it. All right, the first set of materials that we have are our panels. These are rectangles all cut from a sheet of white foam core. They all have the same proportions, right? They're small, medium, large, and extra large versions of the same square. What do we mean when we say they have the same proportions? Well, one way to think about it is if we took the fraction of the short side compared to the long side, that fraction is the same for all of them. They have the same relationship, the same ratio. But in terms of our work, making sure that you have cut your shapes to the right size, they all fit together. So this is my largest panel, my 12 by 17, and my next size, my 12 by 8'6", 2 of them match up to my large one. The same thing is true with my next size, my 12 by 8'6", 2 of my 6 by 8'6" panels. It breaks down a little differently in my smallest size. There, it takes 4 of the little ones to equal my bigger one. Okay, but you can see the relationships are the same. We still have that ratio. Okay, now that's important to keep track of because I can change these. I can cut them into smaller shapes, but only in a couple of different ways. The first way is cutting it in half. I always have to cut parallel to the shorter side down the midpoint. How do I know I got it right? Well, my new shapes will match my old shapes, one of my smaller sizes. If they don't, I did it wrong. Okay. The other option that I have in terms of modifying the dimensions of my panels is to cut it on the diagonal, corner to corner. I can use both pieces. I can do that with any but my smallest squares. My little bitty ones, that's as small as it gets. I can't make it any smaller. Not on the diagonal, not cutting it in half. For my sticks, I start with a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch piece of basswood or balsa wood. Right? So I purchased this as one long stick, about 3 feet long, and all I'm doing is cutting it to length. To do that, I use this tool. This is manufactured by X-Acto, the X-Acto company. It's a miter box and a saw. There are other companies that make them. They're all fine, but you want to make sure you buy them together because they have to fit each other exactly. The way I use this, I lay the piece of wood that I want to cut into the miter box, holding it snug against the edge. And then I set my saw in this channel. This will give me a 90-degree cut. If I wanted a 45-degree cut, I would use this channel. Okay, but for our purposes, it will all be the 90. I've measured on my stick where the cut is going to be, carefully with my scale, and then I'm ready to cut. Now I'm not going to do this up in the air. It has a little lip on the edge here that I can push against the edge of my desk so I can hold everything snugly and get good clean cuts. Right? I want my cuts to be nice and crisp and precise, all even, all smooth. On my panels, I similarly want to have good square edges with clean surfaces. If I start pulling, it means my blade is dull and I need to replace it. In this assignment, I also have some landscape materials. I have trees. The crown of the tree is cut from a 4-inch diameter styrofoam or polystyrene ball. I used my saw again to get a nice flat surface. And then the trunk for the tree is cut from a dowel. I used my miter box to cut it to length and then put it in a pencil sharpener to get a little bit of a point. And then just assemble those so that my tree from bottom to top will be 22 feet tall at 1/4-inch scale. Now, this is pretty unstable, and so at the beginning stages, I'm not going to keep it assembled. I'm just going to let the crown sit on the surface, and that will work well enough for thinking about it until I'm ready to make things more final. I also have hedges, and in the kit of parts, we've built a sample hedge. Right? All of our hedges will be 3 feet wide, so that's 3/4 of an inch at 1/4-inch scale. And our sample one we built is 4 feet tall and 8 feet long, so that's 1 inch tall and 2 inches long. You have unlimited hedges, so you can use them as much as you want. It's free materials, and I'll show you some ways to think about it and things that you might do with those hedges. All right, the next part of my kit of parts is my base. This is my site. This is everything I have to work with. I've drafted the inner rectangle with the 6-foot grid carefully in pen. That's where my seasons have to be. They have to be located within this buildable area rectangle. But this additional perimeter can be used for path, for landscaping, for hills and valleys. I just can't put my seasonal spaces in there. I have to have 4 of my 6 trees in the buildable area, but the other 2 can have their trunks out in the perimeter. So it gives me a little more area. Each of us will be deciding where north is. It can be parallel to the long side or the short side. I could have north up like this or north up like this. Each of you will decide, and we'll explore that in your parties. Okay. So, how do I get started? Okay, the first thing I've done is tape a piece of flimsy to my base. I'm going to sketch out my partee on it. I'm going to define my north arrow on it and use it as a working surface. So the concept I'm working with is the idea of my space as a sundial of the seasons. Right? A sundial is an object we've seen in gardens a lot of times, an old-fashioned way of telling time, where the shadows cast onto the plate of the sundial tell us what time of the day it is. I'm going to extend that idea and think about the way the sun is different at different seasons of the year, and that my relationship with the sun is different in different seasons of the year. I'm also going to think about it metaphorically and symbolically with the idea that sunrise is the birth of each day, just as spring is the birth of the year. We move to the height of the sun in the midday, the height of growth in the summer, and then the decline and eventual death of the seasons and the plant life in the fall and winter. We'll stop at fall. And so that will be at the end of the day. So I'm going to use east sun and morning for my spring space, south sun and midday for my summer space, fall sun, fall and afternoon sun on the west side for my fall space. Okay? So that means my north arrow, my north is going to be up. Right? And east is on the right side, west is on the left side, south is at the bottom. The idea of the sundial makes me think of a curve, of an arc, the way the sun moves across the sky. The form of a sundial is often a circle. And so I'm going to start with the idea of a big half circle as my basic pattern of movement through the 3 seasons, just very roughly sketched here, ready to go. I want my spring space on the east, so I'm going to start with that here. Have my fall opposite and summer in the middle. Now, right now my diagram shows the circulation path going through the spaces, shows the spaces as circles. Neither one is necessarily true. These are just starting ideas, placeholders that I'm going to use as I develop each of my seasonal spaces. So some of the things that I'm thinking about before I start doing anything is, how do I communicate this idea that I have about the way light moves through the seasons and how it moves through the day as a relationship with that? One of the things that I think will help me do that is to have an element in each of my spaces that casts a very clear shadow pattern so that my occupants are noticing it and seeing those shadows and seeing the shapes that they create. To have that be effective, I need to have it be fairly consistent so that as the occupant moves from one space to another, they can see and recognize that this is the same but different. Then I want to keep my architectural vocabulary relatively simple. That's just my preference, my inclination, and I want to be able to focus on the light and the landscape materials and have the architecture be a palette for that to land on. Okay, so we'll see how that works out. All right, so as I started working with this, I decided to use 3 of my 6-foot sticks to create that shadow pattern from the east into the space. I put up one wall and then made a seating element in front of it. Now, I wanted to have some more enclosure than that gave me, but I didn't want anything too solid on the south side because that's where the sun comes in. I didn't want to create too much of a shadow or too much of a sense of enclosure, so I decided to use a large hedge to create that southern boundary. I like that. This hedge is 5 feet tall. My hedges must be even 1 foot height and 1 foot length. So this is 3 foot wide, is required, 5 foot tall, and 15 feet long. I like the idea of the hedge in the spring. It will be getting leaves, it will have flowers, it will smell good, the air will move through it, breezes will come through it. I think it will be a really pleasant feature in the summer. These 3 uprights create a visual frame for the sun and the morning view, and also I hope will give me good shadow patterns. I'm going to test them in just a second. I've got a tree that I'm going to set up just to the north of my space so that I get that sense of definition of the space. I can appreciate the spring blooming, but it's not going to put shade on my space. The boundaries of the space will be defined by where I pave the ground, and that's also the only place that my occupants will walk. And so right now, this space would be defined basically by that kind of rectangle. This is one of the times that my 6-foot grid is handy, because each of my seasonal spaces must be about the same area. And so I can quickly look at this and say, this is 4.5, 5.5, 6, 6.25 squares. Okay? It may not stay that size as we move forward, but it gives me an idea of what my target is for summer and for fall. Okay? To test the shadows, I'm going to use my phone and the light on it. I know that the sun rises in the east, right? So it's going to be very low. Those shadows are going to be long. Early in the spring, the sun rises south of due east, so the shadows will angle up into the space. And then on the longest day of the year, it actually rises north of due east and then cycles back. So this is the kind of pattern I'm going to have in the early morning, and then as the morning progresses, it gradually gets higher. Right? But throughout most of the morning, throughout all of the morning, I'll have a clear shadow pattern, and my occupant will be mostly in sun, which I've decided is desirable because in the spring, in the morning, it's still cool. Okay. Now, in terms of the construction, this is all pretty loose. My sticks and my wall are held in place with Scotch tape. For your preliminary model, everything can be held together with tape, pins, a little bit of glue, but we don't want it to be distracting. We don't want it to obscure our understanding of the idea. I will need to make the paving area of my space and my path more clearly and specifically defined. I'll have to get rid of this flimsy before I'm done. As I work on this, I'm going to think about how to extend this basic vocabulary into the summer and into the fall spaces, because these are 3 parts of a whole. This is a cohesive composition. Right now, I don't know exactly where I'm entering my space. I could be entering here on the west side. I could be entering here on the east side, because I can use this area for my path if I want to make it longer. Some of the things that I would think about in making that decision are, what do I see before I get into the space? And right now, my inclination is to put my path on this side, because that side, my view is more hidden. My walls screen it. To get a better sense of what it feels like to be in my space, I have a little scale figure, just a little schematic person at about 6 foot tall with a base so they can stand up. And I can see, wow, that wall is pretty tall. I can move them through and see what it's going to feel like. I can also use my phone and take photographs right down at eye level so that I can understand what my space feels like as well. The last piece of materials that I have available to me, I can make hills and valleys. So my hills can start 2 feet from the corner. And I have to come in 2 feet before I go up. We'll assume that each layer of foam core is 1 foot. This doesn't use any of my other materials. Again, it's free materials. I can go up as much as 4 feet. Here I've got a sample that just goes up 3 feet. For every foot that I go up, I have to come in 2 feet. Okay? Now that may not seem like a very steep hill, but it really is a very steep hill. It's so steep that we would have trouble growing grass on it. But I can make it less steep, but I can make it as steep as a 2-to-1 slope. My path can also go up and down over the hills and into the valleys. I can walk up and down. I can put my seasonal space up on top of a hill or down at the bottom of the valley. But the floor area of my space, like this rectangle that I defined for my spring space, has to be flat. So I'd have to make a fairly large hill if I wanted to have my summer space be on top of it. The smallest one is that square, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and it starts taking up quite a bit of space. For the preliminary version of this, hills are easy. I can just cut them out of any foam core, stack them up, move them around, take them off, no big deal. Valleys, though, I have to cut into my base, right? And so for that, I don't want to do that yet. So if I want to have a valley, if I want to go downhill, same rules. I can go down 4 feet. Every foot I go down, I have to move over 2 feet. But for the preliminary version, we'll draw it, right? So if, for instance, I decided I wanted a valley in the middle here so that everything was up above it, I could have this be my lowest level, and then for each line, each foot up, I would move 2 feet over, right? So I would measure this out to make sure I had at least 2 feet. But each of these lines then represents 1 foot of elevation going down. So I go down 1 foot, down 2 foot, down 3 foot. I'll show you in another video how to fabricate a valley when you're ready to do it, but that will only be in your final model. All right, so in terms of your preliminary model, you're going to have your 3 seasonal spaces. You're going to have your path. They're going to be fully developed, but they're going to be in preliminary form. So things may be held together with tape and a little bit rough in terms of construction. The path itself, you need to show with a specific material. I just cut up a brown paper grocery bag, and I use the same material for the paving of each of my seasonal spaces. Now I've only developed the spring space. I have to develop the summer space and the fall space before this is done, but I wanted to show you kind of the level of material and definition that you will have in this preliminary model that you'll be turning in for grade. Trees, they can be sitting like this rather than up on their trunks. Hills, though, if I'm going to use them, I need to make them. Valleys, I can just draw. Now that should be glued down or taped down so that it's stable. The path can be shown in something like brown paper, as I have. You can use flimsy, but it should be cut out and carefully positioned. Make sure that each of your seasonal spaces has approximately the same area in its paved surface, and that's the only place that our occupants go. Okay, and so that is what you will be turning in your preliminary design. Good luck, and see you soon.